think of Paris, and, well, chances are the Louvre just pops into your head, right?
Absolutely.
It's this huge presence on the Seine, world's largest museum, yeah, but also just a massive global icon.
Totally.
And the visitor numbers, even around 8.7 million in 2024, which is, down from over 10 million before, it's immense. This place has a real hold on people.
It really does. And it's funny, you look at those amazing galleries, all the masterpieces, and you kind of forget it wasn't always like this.
Wasn't always a museum.
No, not at all. The story's got some pretty surprising twists.
Which is exactly why we're here. You sent over some great sources, and our mission for this deep dive is, well, to really get into the Louvre's incredible journey.
Mm-hmm.
We're going way back, fortress beginnings, right up to the museum everyone knows now, and hitting some, unexpected points. Our main source here is Wikipedia, gives us a really solid overview.
Great foundation.
Okay, so fortress to world-famous museum. How does this epic story actually begin?
It starts surprisingly early. Long before any art was displayed, the Louvre Palace was actually a fortress.
A fortress? Really?
Yeah, built by King Philip II. We're talking late 12th, maybe early 13th century. Yeah. Back then, the English held Normandy, just west of Paris.
Oh.
So Paris needed defending from that side.
Wow. A fortress? It's almost impossible to picture that now, walking through those grand halls.
I know, right?
But you can still see bits of it, can't you? Down in the basement.
Right.
Remnants of the medieval Louvre.
You can, yeah. It's quite something. Like seeing the building's deep history right there under your feet. The foundations of a whole different era beneath all the art.
And the name itself, Louvre, that's a bit mysterious too, isn't it? Where does that come from?
It is. There are a couple of main theories, neither totally certain. One idea connects it to a place for hunting wolves.
Wolves?
Yeah, the Latin lupus for wolf, maybe evolving into lupara later on, meaning a wolf hunting den. Another theory points to a much older mention, like 7th century, of a villa called Louvre, somewhere near Paris. But, exactly where that was in relation to the current building, hard to say.
Wolves or an ancient villa,
No.
Definitely not what you picture alongside the Mona Lisa.
Not quite.
So, okay, it starts as defense. How does it shift towards being, a royal palace?
Well, as Paris grew, the fortress wasn't really needed on that spot anymore. Its military job faded.
Right.
Then in the 14th century, King Charles V decided to make it a proper royal residence. That was a big shift away from the military side.
Okay, becoming more palatial.
Exactly. And then later, Francis I in 1546 really kicked off rebuilding it in the French Renaissance style. That's when it started looking more like the palace we kind of recognize.
So you, the listener, can picture this gradual change, a tough fortress softening into, well, a symbol of royal power and taste.
That's a good way to put it.
It's getting grander, a real statement piece.
Yeah.
But then Louis XIV comes along and decides Versailles is the place to be.
He does. Built that huge palace outside Paris.
That sounds like it could have been, I don't know, bad news for the Louvre. Demoted.
You'd think so, maybe. Moving the whole royal household to Versailles in 1682.
Yeah.
It sounds like a downgrade for the Louvre.
Yeah.
But actually, it kind of set the stage for its future as a museum, almost by accident.
How so?
With the royals gone, the Louvre became the main place to keep the growing royal art collection. And not just art, it also housed artists and craftspeople who had royal patronage.
Ah, okay. Like workshops.
Exactly. Think of the Boulle family, famous cabinet makers. They had workshops, even lived there for generations, supported by the crown.
So Versailles gets the court, but the Louvre gets the seeds of a cultural center.
In a way, yes.
And those royal collections, they're the absolute core of what's in the Louvre today, aren't they? It wasn't like someone just went shopping for art overnight.
Not at all. The foundation of the Louvre's collection is centuries of buying and commissioning by French kings. Francis I, for example, the one who started the Renaissance rebuild. He was a huge art lover. And get this, he acquired the Mona Lisa back in the early 16th century.
Wow. The Mona Lisa's been part of the French national story for that long. Incredible. But it was at Fontainebleau then, right? Not the Louvre yet.
Right, initially at Fontainebleau, but part of the royal holdings that eventually made their way to the Louvre.
Okay, so the art is accumulating within the royal sphere, some of it physically in the Louvre building after Versailles. But it's still royal space, not public. When did people start getting a peek?
There were some early, quite limited steps. In the late 17th century, you had the Cabinet du Roi, which was sort of a gallery for, very select group, art lovers, insiders.
Not exactly open house.
Definitely not. Then, later, mid-18th century, a more formal display of some royal paintings opened up over at the Luxembourg Palace. Still restricted, but a bit more public.
Baby steps.
Baby steps, okay. But the actual idea of turning the Louvre itself into a proper national museum that came before the Revolution, didn't it? It did, yeah. Under Louis XVI, the idea really started to gain steam. The Comte d'Angevier, he was in charge of royal buildings. He proposed turning the Grand Gallery.
The really long gallery.
That's the one.
Yeah.
At the time, it was full of these 3D models of French fortresses.
Seriously? Models?
Yeah. So the plan was to clear those out and create a proper French museum for the royal art. Lots of plans were drawn up.
But it didn't happen.
It stalled, stayed incomplete. It really needed the massive upheaval of the French Revolution to push it over the line.
Okay, right. The revolution. That changes everything. How does a royal palace stuffed with royal art suddenly become a public museum?
The revolution was absolutely the key. In May 1791, the National Constituent Assembly made this huge declaration. The Louvre would be a place for bringing together monuments of all the sciences and arts.
Wow, okay.
And then August 1792, Louis XVI is imprisoned, the monarchy is effectively over, and crucially, the royal collection is declared national property.
National property, just like that. Centuries of royal stuff now belongs to the people.
Pretty much, yeah. A fundamental shift.
But that must have caused some panic. You know, worries about looting, vandalism, things getting lost in the chaos.
Oh, definitely. There was a real sense of urgency. The assembly knew they had to secure these treasures and get them organized for the public. They set up a special commission in October 92 just for that.
And then it opened.
August 10th, 1793, exactly 1 year after the monarchy fell, the Muséum Central des Arts de la République opened its doors.
And free access, 3 days a week. That's pretty radical for the time.
Absolutely revolutionary, you could say.
What were people seeing in those first days? What was the initial collection like?
It started with 537 paintings and 184 other art objects, mostly from the old royal collections, plus stuff confiscated from the church or from nobles who'd fled the country.
Okay.
The New Republic even set aside money to buy more things and catalog it all. But, you know, it wasn't perfect. Paintings were hung super close, frame to frame practically, often without labels.
A bit chaotic.
A bit. And the building itself had problems. It actually had to close down for repairs between 1796 and 1801 because of structural issues.
So a slightly bumpy start, maybe, but the big idea of public museum in the Louvre was real.
Exactly. The seed was planted and it sprouted.
Then Napoleon arrives on the scene, and it feels like everything shifts into high gear. How did he shape the Louvre?
Napoleon saw the huge potential, the symbolic power of the Louvre. In 1802, he appointed Vivant Denon as the first proper director.
Denon.
Yeah, Vivant Denon. He was a scholar, an artist, a diplomat, not just some administrator. It was a statement.
Okay.
And then in 1803, Napoleon renamed it the Musée Napoleon. Pretty direct link to his own power and image.
Musée Napoleon.
Right.
And the collection itself, it ballooned during this time, didn't it? Mostly thanks to, well, let's call them acquisitions from his military campaigns.
Acquisitions is one word for it, yes. His armies marched across Europe and treaties were signed.
Meaning art was taken.
Meaning a lot of art was taken. From Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, and especially Italy. The Treaty of Tolentino with the Pope brought tons of stuff from the Vatican to Paris.
Any famous examples?
Oh, yeah. The horses of St. Mark, those big bronze horses from Venice.
Yeah.
They ended up on top of the Arc de Triomphe du Carousel right outside the Louvre. Statues like the Nile and the Tiber from the Vatican Museum, too.
So for you listening, this period really shows how military power and politics directly shaped what ended up in a museum.
Absolutely. It's a really stark example.
But it's a bit controversial looking back, because after Napoleon fell, a lot of that art went back, didn't it?
It did, and rightly so. From the perspective of the original owners, there was a lot of resentment about the looting.
I bet.
After Waterloo, countries demanded their stuff back. Dannon tried to resist, arguing there wasn't a specific treaty demanding return, but eventually a lot of it was repatriated.
But not everything.
Not everything. Some major pieces stayed. Veronese's huge painting, The Wedding at Cana, for example, still in the Louvre today, right opposite the Mona Lisa.
Wow. Okay, so Napoleon's era ends. The art goes back and forth. What happens next in the 19th century? No emperor calling the shots directly anymore.
Well, the 19th century brought more structure, but also a bit of fragmentation, you could say. Under the restored Bourbon monarchy, Louis VIII, Charles X, the museum's funding often came from the king's budget, the civil list.
Okay.
The paintings in the Grand Gallery were still the main event, But the huge Louvre Palace started housing almost separate specialized collections. People started talking about les musées du Louvre, plural, like multiple museums under one roof.
Ah, so the beginnings of the different departments we see today, like Egyptian antiquities.
Exactly. That's a prime example. In 1826, under Charles X, they officially created the Musée Égyptien.
And this was huge, right? Thanks to people like Champollion.
Absolutely key. Champollion cracking the hieroglyphic code was happening around this time.
Yeah.
Plus, they made major purchases from collectors Durand, Salt, Drovetti. All that formed the basis of the amazing Egyptian collection the Louvre has now.
What other museums popped up inside?
There was the Galerie d'Angoulême for French sculpture, using pieces from Versailles, and another museum run by Alexandre Lenoir. And, kind of oddly, the French Navy had a display of ship models in the Louvre for a while.
Ship models? Seriously?
Yep. It eventually moved out and became the Musée National de la Marine, the Maritime Museum. But it started inside the Louvre. Shows how broad the initial idea was.
Definitely. Okay, after the Bourbons, there's Louis Philippe. What was his focus for the Louvre?
Louis Philippe was actually more interested in Versailles. He was turning that into a big museum about French history.
Ah.
So the Louvre got a bit less attention, comparatively. Though he did back the creation of an Assyrian museum, he was the Assyrian, to house sculptures found by Bota in Mesopotamia.
Right, the Assyrian discoveries were a big deal then.
Huge. He also showed his own private Spanish art collection there for a bit.
And then there was that short period, the Second Republic, mid-century. Any big moves for the Louvre then?
Yeah, even though they weren't around long, they did quite a bit. Lots of repairs, finishing off galleries like the Galerie d'Apollon, renovating key spaces. And interestingly, in 1850, they opened the Musée.
Mexican Museum.
Yeah, the first museum in Europe focused on pre-Columbian art.
Right.
Really shows how the worldview was expanding.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Okay, then comes another Napoleon III, emperor again. Big changes under him.
Oh, massive changes. Napoleon III really left his mark on the Louvre, both inside and out. He set up two new museums within it. The Musée des Souverains, about French royalty, and the Musée Napoleon III, partly to show off major buys like the huge Campana collection of antiquities.
Boosting his own image, maybe.
Definitely part of it. But the biggest impact was architectural. His architects, Visconti and then Le Feuille, basically created the Louvre we see today around the Cour Napoleon courtyard.
The big central courtyard.
Exactly. They built new wings, connected things up, and controversially, they actually shortened the Grand Gallery.
Shorten it. Wow.
To create the Salle des États, that big room where the Mona Lisa is now, closer to the Tuileries Palace where Napoleon III lived. Easier access for him, presumably.
Yeah.
So for you listening, when you walk around that central part of the Louvre, much of that layout is thanks to Napoleon III.
Wow. Okay, huge building projects. Let's move into the later 19th century, Third Republic. Monarchy's gone for good. How does the Louvre settle into this new era?
Well, first, it had a very close call during the Paris Commune in 1871. The nearby Tuileries Palace burned down, but the Louvre itself largely escaped major damage.
Lucky escape.
Very. After that, more spaces in the South Wing gradually got turned over to the museum. Under the Republic, the focus really shifted to building the collection through gifts and archaeology.
Big donations.
Yes, like the collection Lacaze in 1869, hundreds of paintings, including masterpieces by Rembrandt, Watteau, Chardin, a massive boost.
And archaeology.
Yes, digs were bringing back amazing finds. The winged Victory of Samothrace found earlier was given that really dramatic spot on the staircase.
Ah, the Nike. Iconic.
Totally. And excavations in Susa, in Persia, modern Iran, brought incredible artifacts for the Near Eastern department.
But you mentioned earlier it was starting to specialize, right? Moving away from being a museum of everything.
Exactly. That trend continued. The Mexican collection eventually went off to the Trocadero Ethnographic Museum. Asian art went to the Musée Guimet. So it was streamlining.
But they did add Islamic art.
They did. The first gallery for Islamic art opened in 1893, showing a growing interest there, even as other areas were spun off. Then, of course, you had the 20th century and the World Wars.
Right. World War II must have been a huge disruption, evacuating all that art.
A monumental task. Just imagine trying to pack up and hide the Mona Lisa, the Venus de Milo, thousands of priceless objects, moving them around the country in secret to keep them safe from bombing and looting.
Incredible stories, like something from a film.
Truly. It all came back safely after the liberation, thankfully.
So post-war, what was the mood? Rebuilding, rearranging?
Yeah, rearranging continued. Sometimes tastes changed. Some of those elaborate 19th century decorations got removed. And you started seeing hints of modern art creeping in, like Georges Braque painting a ceiling in one gallery.
Interesting. A bit of modernism mixing with the old masters.
And modern design, too, like furniture by Pierre Paulin in some areas. Then came the really big shakeup in 1981, President Mitterrand's Grand Louvre project.
The Grand Louvre. Okay, now we're talking the pyramid.
Exactly. The famous, or infamous at first, glass pyramid in the Cour Napoleon.
Right. People weren't sure about it initially, were they?
Definitely controversial. But the plan was huge. It involved kicking the Ministry of Finance out of the Richelieu wing.
They were based in the Louvre.
A huge chunk of it, yeah. So they moved out, freeing up enormous space. The whole museum entrance and layout was rethought. I.M. designed the pyramid as the new main entrance, leading down into this vast underground concourse.
And new wings opened up.
Yes, the Richelieu wing finally became fully museum space. And the Carousel du Louvre shopping mall was built underneath, too. It completely changed how you experience the museum.
The pyramid is so iconic now you can't imagine the Louvre without it. So that brings us pretty much to the 21st century. What are the big recent stories?
Well, there's been a continued effort to broaden the scope again in some ways. President Chirac pushed for bringing some non-Western art back into the main Louvre building,
Really?
creating the Pavillon de Session.
Okay.
And a whole new Department of Islamic Art was created in 2003. It got its own dedicated, stunning new galleries in the Danan wing in 2012, with major funding from the Al Walid bin Talal Foundation.
So really giving Islamic art a prominent place.
Absolutely, a major statement.
And what about contemporary art? We mentioned Brock back then, but more recently.
There's been a definite re-engagement. Commissions from artists like Anselm Kiefer, Cy Twombly. Twombly painted a ceiling in the Salle des Bronzes. That actually caused a bit of controversy later when it was redesigned after he died. More recently, François Marlet, Elias Crespin. They're bringing contemporary voices into dialogue with the historical collections.
Interesting dynamic. And then the pandemic hit everyone hard, didn't it?
Massively.
Yeah.
Visitor numbers plummeted, obviously, but it also pushed the Louvre to really beef up its online presence, creating a huge digital platform so people could still connect with the collections remotely.
Making it accessible even if you can't physically be there.
Exactly. And looking forward, just this year, 2025, President Macron announced big plans for more renovations and even expansion.
Oh, really? Why?
Mostly to cope with the sheer number of visitors again. Part of the plan includes creating a dedicated room just for the Mona Lisa.
A room for Mona to manage the crowds around her?
That seems to be the main idea. Spread people out a bit, improve the experience for seeing that one incredibly famous painting, and maybe ease pressure elsewhere.
Makes sense. Okay, we've covered the history, the building, but the heart of it is the art, the collections. Over 600,000 objects.
Yeah, the official number is around 615,797 objects owned by the museum. A huge number are accessible online now, too, which is great for you, the listener, to explore.
It's mind-boggling, spread across 8 main departments.
8 curatorial departments.
Yeah.
Covering just an incredible span of time and geography.
Let's just quickly touch on each one. Egyptian antiquity is going to start there, one of the big draws.
Oh, absolutely. Over 50,000 pieces. It's one of the world's greatest collections. Roots in the old royal collection, Napoleon's expedition, but massively grown through digs and purchases. You've got icons like the seated scribe, the huge Great Sphinx of Tanis. Just amazing stuff.
Then Near Eastern antiquities, Mesopotamia, Persia.
Yeah, covering that whole cradle of civilization area before Islam. Think the Code of Hammurabi stele.
The Law Code.
That's the one. And the incredible glazed brick panels like the frieze of archers from Darius's palace in Susa.
Stunning colors. Okay, then Greek, Etruscan, and Roman, the classics.
Yep. It goes from the Neolithic right up to the 6th century AD and home to probably the 2 most famous statues after the Mona Lisa. The Venus de Milo.
Of course.
And the Winged Victory of Samothrace on the stairs, plus tons of Greek pottery in the Gallery Campana.
Right. The newest department you mentioned is Islamic art.
Relatively new as a full department.
Yeah.
Spanning 13 centuries, 3 continents, incredible diversity, ceramics, glass, metalwork, textiles, carpets, manuscripts, pieces like the Pixade del Mugira, an amazing ivory casket, or the Baptistery of St. Louis, this incredibly detailed inlaid metal basin.
Amazing craftsmanship. Okay, sculptures. This is non-classical stuff before 1850.
Exactly. Stuff that isn't Greek, Etruscan, or Roman. It grew a lot in the 19th century. You've got French sculpture, but also Italian masters like Michelangelo. His dying slave was displayed there. And Canova's beautiful Psyche, revived by Cupid's kiss.
Very romantic. Decorative art's what falls under that.
This is a huge category. Furniture, ceramics, tapestries, jewelry, glassware, enamel work. Basically, the artistry of objects from the Middle Ages up to the mid-19th century. Think royal jewels like Louis XV's coronation crown or Madame de Pompadour's collection of Sèvres porcelain.
Wow. Luxury goods through the ages. Okay, painting. Probably the biggest draw for many people.
Absolutely. Over 7,500 paintings from the 13th century up to 1848. Huge French collection, obviously, but also fantastic Northern European works. Vermeer, Rembrandt.
Dutch masters.
Yep. And the Italians, many collected by Francis III and Louis XIV, and, of course, the Mona Lisa.
Can't forget her.
Or Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. So many icons. And that Lacaze collection donation we mentioned brought in a huge number of top-tier paintings.
Right. Lastly, prints and drawings? Maybe less visible?
Often kept in storage or displayed in rotation because they're sensitive to light. Yeah. But it's a massive collection. Drawings, prints, pastels, miniatures, books. Started with the king's own collection of drawings. Got a huge boost from the Edmond de Rothschild donation. Really important for understanding artists' working methods. Mostly housed in the Pavillon de Flore.
Staggering, the sheer volume and variety. And a lot of the ancient stuff came directly from digs the Louvre was involved in, right?
Absolutely. The Louvre wasn't just buying things. It was actively involved in archaeological research for well over a century. Egypt, the Near East, Greece, sponsoring expeditions, sending archaeologists. There's even a room, the Rotonde de Palan, that commemorates many of those digs and the people involved. It shows the museum as an active center of discovery, not just a display case.
Yeah, it's not just static, it's part of uncovering history. Now, running this huge place today must be incredibly complex. Who's in charge? How does it all work financially?
Well, it's owned by the French state, the government.
Yeah.
But since the 90s, it's become much more autonomous, meaning it has more control over its own management and finances, but it also has to generate a lot more of its own income. Ticket sales, shops, partnerships, fundraising. They need that money for projects, upkeep, acquisitions.
And the director?
The current director is Laurence Descartes, appointed in 2021, and notably the first woman ever to hold the top job at the Louvre.
That's significant, and partnerships seem key, especially internationally, like Louvre Abu Dhabi.
Very key. These collaborations are vital now. They have one with the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. But yeah, Louvre Abu Dhabi is the biggest example. It's a major agreement. Abu Dhabi pays a lot of money to use the Louvre name, get expertise, and crucially, borrow hundreds of artworks from the Paris collection on a rotating basis.
$1 billion deal, wasn't it? Something like that.
Around that figure, yeah, over several decades. And closer to home, they've also built a huge state-of-the-art storage and research facility up in Liévin in northern France to house reserves and study collections.
Makes sense. They must have so much stuff not on display. Of course, with a history this long and complex, there are bound to be some controversies, right?
Oh, inevitably.
Yeah.
We touched on the Napoleonic looting. That legacy is still debated. Then there's the issue of Nazi-looted art during World War II.
Right, the MNR works.
Exactly. Musées Nationaux Récupération, art recovered after the war, but whose original owners couldn't be traced. Provenance research is ongoing, and restitutions still happen. It's a complex and sensitive issue.
And the Abu Dhabi project had issues, too.
There was criticism and concern raised, particularly during the construction phase, about the treatment and rights of migrant workers building the museum complex on Saadiyat Island. So, yeah, important context to keep in mind.
Definitely. It's important to acknowledge those difficult parts of the story, too. Okay, finally, before we wrap up, the Louvre isn't just that one building in Paris anymore, is it? There are offshoots, related museums.
That's right. It's kind of branched out. There are several museums with links. The Musée de Cluny, the medieval museum in Paris, used to be run by the Louvre. The Jeu de Paume, which once showed Impressionists, was part of it.
Okay.
There's a Musée du Petit Palais in Avignon that's officially linked. A Gypsothèque, a plaster cast collection out at Versailles. The Musée Delacroix, the artist's studio, is attached administratively. And then the big ones, Louvre Lens, a major outpost in northern France.
Right, near the new storage facility.
Exactly, and of course Louvre Abu Dhabi. So the Louvre brand and influence really extends well beyond Paris now.
So its reach is truly global. Wow, what an incredible journey we've traced, from medieval fortress walls to this absolute powerhouse of global art.
It really is an amazing story. Constant change, constant evolution. Fortress, palace, revolutionary museum, imperial treasure house, national institution, adapting through centuries.
Growing, specializing, facing challenges, embracing new ideas like the pyramid or digital access.
Exactly. The collection growing hugely, especially under Napoleon, then being refined, redisplayed according to changing tastes and scholarship. It never stands still.
And hopefully, for you listening, this deep dive into the sources you gave us has really illuminated that journey, bringing this iconic place to life beyond just the famous masterpieces. We've certainly packed a lot in.
We definitely have. And maybe it leaves you with a thought. What does it really mean for a national museum, any national museum, to change so profoundly over hundreds of years? It reflects shifts in power, obviously, but also in how we see art, how we define culture, what we decide is important enough to preserve and show as a nation's heritage. That definition keeps evolving.
That's a great point. It's a mirror to history itself.
It really is. Perhaps this has sparked your interest. Maybe you want to explore one of those departments or a particular period like the Revolution or Napoleon III's rebuilding in more depth. The Louvre story is far from over.